The title isn't a bit. I actually do hate the Polar Express movie. I'm not saying it's the worst Christmas film, there's a lot of worse ones, but it's easily one of the most disappointing films I've ever seen, right up there with Rob Zombie's Halloween. Now for me, a lot of that resentment has to do with how much I adored the original picture book by Chris Van Allsburg back in the day. It's a classic for a reason. It, along with the original Night Before Christmas poem, I think really defined a cosmology for St. Nicholas that I think really has resonated with kids who read it and grew up with it. It inspires the imagination in a way that other stories just simply don't. The characters bear witness to something incredible, something amazing. Much like Dante Alighieri in the Inferno, they descend into a world unlike their own, witness something spectacular, and then return home, changed, but not having undergone much of a challenge to get from point A to point B. There's very little there that impedes the characters. As a story, it doesn't really fit in the traditional structure that you see in the Hollywood blockbuster, the 3 acts, the hero's journey, the save the cat formula. We'll get into all those later. I mean, think about it, with Night Before Christmas, I almost said Nightmare Before Christmas, would have been a bit of a mistake. With that story, what happens? A guy and his wife go to bed, kids are in bed, guy hears some noise going downstairs, goes check it out, sees a big fat guy breaking into his house, leaving gifts behind, stealing food, climbing up the chimney to escape. I mean, look, that's just a regular night in New Jersey, really. In fact, a slightly boring one at that. But it became an iconic narrative. And with the Polar Express, what's the story? There's a boy. He firmly believes in the book in Santa Claus. He's listening to the bells to hear them, despite what other kids say. And as he strains his ears that night, that one Christmas Eve night, a gigantic train materializes outside of his home. And this train, the Polar Express, is a comfortable vehicle full of kids who are excited, they're talking amongst themselves, they're comforted with hot chocolate. They get to the North Pole, they meet Santa, and the boy returns home with the first gift of the season. A little bell from off of Santa's sleigh that only rings if you believe in the magic of Christmas. And the main character is by design static. He's meant for you, the reader, to project yourself onto. It's a story about holding on to your childhood, about holding on to the wonder of magic and enigma in a way that says, hey kids, you don't need to change. You're all right. You're good the way you are. And for a kid, that's exciting. Being told that to really experience magic, all you have to do is remain a child, to keep the wonder and awe in your eyes for as long as you can. That's not really what a Hollywood story does, though. Hollywood stories tend to focus on characters who undergo change in some way. They are changed fundamentally by their experiences, and that's where things get complicated. Secondary to the plot of the book is the incredible hand-painted illustrations throughout everything, and they create this nostalgic winter vibe. It's so perfect. There's a realism to each illustration, but also an impressionistic vibe to it. One thing that strikes me is how small the kids look in relation to this larger, massive train, to the enigmatic expanse of the cold but warm North Pole. It's at once enchanting, but also comforting, because there's a sense that these kids may be small, but there are those out there that want to protect them, nurture them, and care about them. It's a sense of love that's vibrant. This sense of love is virtually missing from the actual film. The reason the Polar Express fails as an adaptation is it tried to change the book to fit the Hollywood structure, to fit the 3-act, save the cat, hero's journey structure, and in doing so, created one of the most meandering, annoying films ever produced. It is an expensive, overblown, over-budgeted piece of nonsense that makes you hate everything about it. It really is one of those films where, like, if you grew up with it, you have fond memories with your parents and your family at Christmas time, sure, but when I was a little older when it came out, I was like in, middle school, so I was at that perfect point where something enchanting could have won me over, and something saccharine and underwhelming would have pushed me away. So, where does the Polar Express go wrong? Many people might assume that the Polar Express was turned into a film by a big studio system, that at Warner Brothers, who I think distributed the film, snatched up the rights like they did with every other film, like Harry Potter, their other big success at the time, and go, okay, another kid's classic, let's cash in on this. But actually, not quite. The rights were purchased in 1999 by Tom Hanks. Now, Tom Hanks read the book, The Polar Express, with his kids and thought, I kind of want to play that conductor character. I think I could really do a good job with that. Oh, and I might as well play Santa Claus as well. And he went to the original author for the film rights. Van Allsburg, he was a little unwilling to sell the rights at first, but then he saw that Tom Hanks was the guy asking. And keep in mind, this is right after Tom Hanks starred in Saving Private Ryan. You didn't say no to the guy. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, well, he was in Toy Story. That probably meant that Van Allsburg was like, yeah, do a CG animated film like Toy Story. But actually, no. One of the terms that Van Allsburg had, selling the rights to Tom Hanks, was that the film had to not be animated. Given the art style of the book, it's clear that Van Allsburg wanted to maintain a sense of realism, a sense of physical wonder, and was like, listen, this won't work in your Disney-fied version of the story. It has to be live action. And Tom Hanks agreed. And after arranging a co-production deal with Castle Rock Entertainment to, co-produce and co-finance the film, Tom Hanks turned to his first choice as director, Rob Reiner. Rob Reiner was coming off one of the greatest film runs any director has ever had until 1994 hit, and he made North, which completely derailed this whole thing.
The worst movie of 1994, the movie that Roger and I each would least like to sit through a second time. The single worst picture of 94. It's called North, directed by Rob Reiner, of all people, written by Hans Weibel.
I think I like it even less than you do, if that's possible. When it came time to write my newspaper review of this movie, I don't know, something just came over me. My fingers on the keyboard had little minds of their own. I was rolling along, writing my usual scathing but civilized comments, when suddenly a sinister inner force took over and I found myself typing, and I quote, "I hated this movie. Hated, 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 hated this movie. Hated it. Hated every simpering, stupid, vacant, audience-insulting moment of it." Unquote.
And again, it didn't look at the time like North would really derail Rob Reiner's creative genius either, because Rob Reiner, after doing North, also released The American President, which became kind of a blueprint for the show The West Wing. So Rob Reiner was still at the top of his game. It was a big stumbling block with North, but he was still seen as a, someone you brought in to do your Oscar-winning films, and he had a lot of talent. A lot of his films leading up to The Polar Express honestly told me that he would have been perfect too. 3 films in particular: Princess Bride, Stand By Me, and Misery, all of which were Rob Reiner directed films. Princess Bride, much like Polar Express, is a fantasy story, and it is whimsical, and it is a little silly, but it also has a lot of sentimentality and heart where it counts. The writing is perfect. It's a great adventure film for families and for older people reminiscing about the stories they grew up with. Stand By Me, however, is also a lot like The Polar Express. It's a story told from an adult looking back on his childhood, and it's nostalgic, it's warm, it's sincere. The characters talk like kids. There's a lot of humanity to it, but there's also a lot of melancholy to it, a sense of loss for what once was. And I think that really hits the nail on the head with the tone The Polar Express captures, where the adult, looking back on his childhood, reflects on how the bell still rings for him, whereas all his friends and even his sister can no longer hear the ringing of that magic bell. There's a nostalgia to it, a sadness. But I think the one film that indicates to me that Rob Reiner would have been perfect for this was Misery. Now granted, Rob Reiner didn't write Misery, that was Stephen King. But with Misery, Rob Reiner directed a film that takes place in one room where one character lays on a bed for the whole time, and it's absolutely thrilling. At no point is that film boring, and in fact you're on the edge of your seat the whole time. Reiner knew how to take a story centered in one location and tell it in a way that was compelling, interesting, and very meaningful. And for that reason, I think he would have been perfect. So naturally, Rob Reiner left the project after things stalled in the early 2000s. It was set for release in 2001. Things happened, and Zemeckis was brought in. Now again, Zemeckis, on paper, would have been perfect for The Polar Express. He had just directed Tom Hanks in 2 previous movies, Forrest Gump and Castaway, and they were both seen as masterpieces of their time. And while people have kind of, gotten a little harsher on Forrest Gump over the years, at this time it was seen as one of the greats. Also, Zemeckis had directed some great movies. Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and all of this indicated he could do the magic of The Polar Express really well, if he was given the opportunity to direct. And again, like Reiner, he had also made a movie where a person is isolated in one spot for a prolonged period of time, that being Castaway. Now, Rob Reiner had already drafted a script that was being reviewed by Zemeckis, and Zemeckis was like, we can make some changes. Let's make it a little more exciting. Let's punch this up a little bit. We're making a family film for kids. Let's try some cool ideas. And he's adding ideas. He added more scenes involving the other kids, for example, specific kids throughout the script. Okay, on paper, that sounds good. He added a new original character, a hobo who exists on the train. Maybe it's a ghost or spirit.
Do you believe in ghosts?
Okay, Zemeckis, that's a little weirder. Who's going to play it? Oh, Tom Hanks is going to play him. Okay, so Tom Hanks is playing half the cast at this point. Okay, that's cool, I guess. So how are we going to do this? Oh, right, you want to make it animated. Again, Van Allsburg had said, hey, I don't want my book to be animated. But at this point, the rights were already out of Van Allsburg's hands. It was in Zemeckis' hands now.
With performance capture, you can create any character you want in the computer and have any performer perform that part.
So, okay, Zemeckis is doing something a little different. All right, motion capture. Pure motion capture, a process that had not really been done all that well at that time. These were effects that were not perfected yet, and in fact were only becoming popular thanks to the release of a film by one of Zemeckis' good friends, Peter Jackson. Now, granted, there was some motion capture work before that, of course, but you gotta keep in mind, at this time in the 2000s, CG animation was really unpolished. A lot of people like to point out the Pirates of the Caribbean and say, oh, look how great effects used to look. Look how great the effects were back then. Can we go back to that? Well, no. The reason you always point out Pirates of the Caribbean is because you're ignoring all the exceptions. CG effects at the time were really rough. Look at the first Harry Potter. Look at the first Spider-Man. Those CG effects were extremely difficult and often were shot from a distance, so you wouldn't notice that they couldn't get faces right. Or in Spider-Man's case, they have a mask over his face because that's a little easier to CG than his actual human expressions. Otherwise, you get looked too closely and they either look like rubber or they look like a soulless doll. How is Zemeckis going to have characters emote using this motion capture? And again, with a movie like Lord of the Rings, Gollum's features are exaggerated. They're very large. So they were easier to animate because, hey, these were bigger eyes. These are bigger mouths. Also, Gollum was one effect, not an entire set of motion capture dolls being propped around. Weightless CG. That was a big thing too, where people would jump and they'd fall. Wouldn't feel like they're falling at the right rate of acceleration. They were elements that just took you out of CG effects at that time, and Zemeckis, rather than say, hey, this might be difficult, ran straight ahead. I should also point out that The Polar Express was not the first film to be released with fully motion captured actors. That would be Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, which, if you look at how that film turned out, that should have been a warning sign, but what are you going to do? And make no mistake, The Polar Express is one of the most expensive films ever made. You might not think that at first. You look at the budget on paper and think, oh, $170 million. And that's not so bad, but you're not keeping in mind, that was 20 years ago. That was in 2004 money. Let's account for inflation. If The Polar Express were made today with the same budget just adjusted for inflation, the film would cost $282,327,500. That would make it more expensive than the average Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. This Polar Express film would cost more than about half of the MCU. Keep that in mind. And where did that money go? It went to an unpleasant, uncomfortable, strange-looking movie where everyone looks like a doll, where everyone looks like a soulless, not at all like a human being. So, why? Why was this done? Well, because Zemeckis wanted to include roller coaster sequences and larger-than-life funnels and all that. He wanted to include spectacle to show this new, incredible, crazy thing he could do with his camera.
But your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Now, I do want to point out a few positives here, because I'm going to get very negative, because I actually hate this movie. What's some good things? Well, the film does have some great music. Mainly because it echoes the leitmotif of the only good song in the movie. I think the opening scene, the ending scene, and the scene where the boy meets Santa Claus, those are really enchanting. I love them. They're beautiful. They're also the only scenes from the book that are directly adapted. And even then, because of the context, they're robbed of their magic. And I think Tom Hanks is good in every single role in the film. I love his subtle irritation as the conductor especially, because it's clear he's trying to guide the kids down a certain path, but he's also playing a role. He's playing up the, oh, I'm so irritated, oh, I'm so flustered, I have to get there on time, oh, we're running late. And there is a sense of continuity and characterization that is more in detail with the conductor than any other character in the movie. He is the only character who seems to have more than one primary emotion. Consider that. Now, the negatives, everything else. The big problem with adapting the Polar Express, as I mentioned up top, is that the original story doesn't fit into the standard story structures that most Hollywood blockbusters fall into, especially a film this expensive. Because if you're going to make a film this pricey, you better follow the structures Hollywood wants in order to return a profit. Those structures do exist for a reason. They're popular. People respond warmly to them. In fact, some critics confuse adherence to the Hollywood structure as merits of quality of writing, when that's not the case, as we see in the original book. I did compare it to Dante's Inferno a little bit, and that was not accidental. They are very similar stories in terms of structure. A character meets a figure. In Dante's case, Virgil. In the Polar Express's case, the conductor. And they meet him at a crossroad in their life, when their faith is at its most vulnerable. They're taken on a journey and descend into another world, into the Inferno in the case of Dante, or into the North Pole in the case of the boy. This does not follow either the heroic journey or the Save the Cat script structure, the beat sheets that all screenwriters follow. With the hero's journey, the way it starts off is that the hero is called to adventure. They may deny the call at first, but they travel anyway. They go through these various systems of adventure. They encounter some new friends. And when they're about to get what they want, something comes in to turn the tables, to send them flying back. They face great adversity. They face great loss, but then pull themselves up and succeed and return home with the quote-unquote amulet, with something to represent their adventure. Very simple structure. Polar Express, the book, doesn't follow that. Kid's call to action, sure, doesn't really hesitate. He arrives at his destination, defies all the gathering of allies, all the misadventures along the way. He gets to his destination, is handed the amulet, and then comes back home. Doesn't follow the hero structure, because it's not following that story. Now, Save the Cat structure, a little different. This is based on a very iconic book for screenwriters called Save the Cat. And I'll show you the beat sheet right now. This is the general structure. It's very similar to the hero's journey, but slightly different, because with Save the Cat, it breaks it down to what page these events should take place at. Act 1. Introduce the characters. Set them up in their normal environment. The theme has to be stated by the 12th page of the script, or by the 6th page of the script, or whatever. Then, create a catalyst. Something that causes them to be spurred into action. Now, from here, this is the entrance into the adventure. Much like the call to action in the hero's journey, this is what sends the protagonist into the fun and games of Act 2. Act 2, something has to happen to distinguish that we are now in Act 2. Maybe the set changes. Maybe a murder happens in a murder mystery. Maybe they encounter someone who changes their lives, or maybe their home village is destroyed. Something that could directly cuts off Act 1. There's no return. Now we're moving forward. And they encounter the B-plot, the side story that kind of runs through the whole story that complements the main conflict. There's the fun and games segment. What the audience came here to see, the cool stuff. If you're having a murder mystery, this is where the investigation happens. If it's an action film, this is where the hero starts beating up bad guys, something like that. But everything changes when we reach the midpoint. Something shifts, the story inverts. The quote-unquote bad guys need to close in, to add tension. And as things happen, things fall apart for the hero. We reach eventually the dark pit of the soul, where all is lost. The heroes feel hopeless, like they'll never get to their goal. And then that's where Act 3 comes in. They have a plan, a strategy, how to survive, or how to triumph, or how to get what they want. And it all leads into the finale, this climax where every plot point is fulfilled, everything is tied up, the characters hit their goal, and the conflict between what the characters want and what the characters need is satisfied in a way that resonates with the core theme of the story. Whether it's a happy ending or a sad ending, that's up to the screenwriter, but the structure that leads to that point remains the same. Oh, and at some point, you gotta have the character save the cat. That's where the title comes in. Saving the cat is when the protagonist does something kind or generous for someone else that is unnecessary. It's meant to make the audience go, oh hey, I like this person. I want to see them succeed. It's meant to put you on their side. Now, it's very clear that Zemeckis was thinking about Save the Cat when writing the Polar Express movie script, because he follows the structure to a T. Unfortunately, he's stretching a very small story across a very large canvas. And unlike something like, say, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, there isn't even the implication of the structure in the original framework of the story. So he's stretching what's ultimately an Act 1 and an Act 3, with a little bit of the midpoint put in, across a massive structure that requires a certain pacing, a certain set of events to occur, and it's clear that he is stretching his concept thin without really reevaluating how to change the text of the story to really reflect the structure in a meaningful way. So Zemeckis spins his wheels between the plot points of the book, which are simply: kid leaves on the Polar Express, kid gets to the North Pole, kid meets Santa, kid gets his gift, belief. That's it. And you can tell that because Act 1, not a whole lot of adjustment. It's just a little longer than what happens in the book. They state the theme, the characters discuss in very overt ways, oh, it's his last Christmas, really, before he stops believing in Santa. He looks at books to say, oh, hey, the North Pole is a vacant, dead landscape, there's nothing there. And you get the sense of, oh, the kid is in a conflict of faith. Belief is the core theme. We establish the boy in his natural landscape, his room, with his family, his home. Then, midpoint, get to the North Pole. Leave the Polar Express, take the train, get to the North Pole. That's the midpoint. Act 3, he meets Santa, gets the bell, it rings, kind of codifying the idea of belief and the power of belief. Then he returns home with his amulet. What do we do with the rest of the script? Evidently, not a whole lot. And look, at the beginning with Act 1, rewatching it, I kind of was reconsidering my notion, because the film, while not great and not really subtle, does seem to flow nicely. Up until, the shots of the Polar Express outside the boy's home, they're great shots. There's this fog and shadows out there, and it adds a sense of enigma, but also wonder and excitement and like a mystical kind of dreamlike quality to it. I think one reason why the Polar Express as a work has survived so well is the visual of the Polar Express outside the boy's home, combining the fantastical with the familiar, taking something that really should not be there, and just, it's naturally there. It's as though it's always been there. And that kind of naturalistic fantasy element really resonates. It's surreal, but also hauntingly beautiful. But then something happens. The boy gets on the train. And from there, the film descends into the most irritating, obnoxious nonsense of visual noise I've ever had the misfortune of watching, even as a child. Now look, let me just be blunt about this. I hate every single one of these children. I know everyone hates that one know-it-all kid. And yeah, sure, I'm also aware that Lily Orchard one time said, I was like the know-it-all kid, and tried to fade in my face over his face to annoy me or be a jerk to me, whatever. But that's not important. At least that kid has an arc. You know who that kid's personality is. The other characters are so flat and so basic and have nothing to them that I could afford some irritating personality. The problem is I was searching for it. I was looking for any hint of character, and there's nothing there. Like there's the one lonely kid whose Christmas has been a disappointment to him. Okay, how has it been a disappointment to you? There's the one girl who's supposed to be the leader. What does she lead? She doesn't do anything. She's like basically makes two decisions throughout the whole movie. She gives hot chocolate to the lonely kid, and she follows the sound of a bell. So every other option, she's led along. She's strung along from point A to point B by some external force. She's not really given choices. She's given a railroad to follow. And she has to follow that railroad path. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Act 2 starts with the break into Act 2 beat, where they get into the train, they're introduced to the kids, and they get hot chocolate, right? Okay. But right away, the boy has no conversations with any of the other kids. They speak to him or talk around him, but they don't really talk with him. He's not really given a chance to open up or be honest about his feelings until he meets the hobo on the roof, which again, that character is ridiculous, but we'll get to that. He's just kind of watching everyone else and making decisions and acting, but you never get a sense of how he interacts with anyone else. And because of that, and you might miss this, none of the kids introduce each other. They don't have names. They don't have identities beyond, oh, there's the kid who's lonely. There's the kid who's a know-it-all. There's the girl who's like a leader, quote unquote. There's no actual names, and so you can't even get intimate with the characters. And if the characters don't care enough about each other to at least say, hey, my name is blah, why should you as the audience care who they are? How can you walk away and say, oh, I love that scene where so-and-so did this? You don't know who so-and-so's name is. It's like you barely know it. You're kept at an arm's length from these kids because you're not allowed to get to know them. Now, the B story is honestly a little more compelling than the main story. That's where the lonely kid comes on board. He's clearly from a nice little house. He seems very sad. He's very small. He's smaller than everyone else. And you never get a sense as to why he's so sad. You get implications. You can assume, oh, small house, maybe he's poor. Oh, maybe he's had loss in his life around Christmas time that makes him resent the holiday. You don't know. I mean, it could be like a Gremlin situation where his dad was climbing down the chimney and got stuck and broke his neck or something, like Gremlins. But at least with Gremlins, that's memorable. We're not given anything with this kid. He's just sad. And he just decides to isolate himself from all the other kids. But we, the audience, are also isolated from his thought process. He's just an object to us. He is the lonely kid they have to talk to, that they have to drag into the events of the narrative. But he's not really given a personality for us to project upon, to be intimate with. Now, the first main conflict are the tickets. So, you see, what happens is, when they're given hot chocolate, which we'll get to the hot chocolate scene later, don't we? I haven't forgotten about that. The one girl, she's like, the kid in the other cart, he doesn't have his hot chocolate, let's go bring it to him. And the conductor guides the girl over there. And the boy, the main character, sees on the girl's seat, oh, hey, she left her ticket behind. And so naturally decides to give the ticket to the girl. Unnecessarily at that. There's no reason to do that. You can assume, oh, she'll come back, her ticket's safe and sound there, no reason to worry. But the kid runs out with the ticket and loses it. Now the girl's in trouble. Now the conductor's like, oh, you don't have your ticket, oh, it's too bad, let me take you right this way, young lady. And the boy thinks now, oh, they're gonna toss this little girl out in the Arctic Circle somewhere. And they're just gonna dump her out in the snow. And so this whole big sequence comes around where you know the whole time, there's no way this girl is gonna get hurt. She's totally safe. There's nothing about the situation that's gonna cause her harm. But we gotta go around the train and get the ticket back to her because the ticket happened to fly back in, and through a whole series of events, like this whole long sequence with the tickets flying around nature. It's by birds, it's by wolves, it's on the snow, and it falls right back happenstance into the magic train because that's something we cared about. And it's like a 5-minute sequence where we watch this ticket fly across the Arctic. 5 minutes that could be spent establishing characters, having the characters introduce their names. But no, it's all this flashy, unnecessary sequence for a conflict that's entirely unnecessary and doesn't actually tie in with anything going on. Now, to make that even more frustrating, the sequences used for this nature-long ticket-flying scene, they're lifted from the book, but the scenes in the original book are calm shots of nature, meant to emphasize the warmth of the train versus the coldness of the Arctic, meant to establish scene, establish setting. Keep this in mind. This stillness will become very relevant later when I discuss what I was hoping the Polar Express would be. But it's very disappointing to see how this still, calm moment became an action set piece in the adaptation. And of course, the conductor's not going to throw the girl into the Arctic Circle. He brings her to the front of the train where she's steering, she's pulling the gas, she's having fun. The kid was never in any harm's way. And the sequence of trying to get to the front of the cart, to get to the girl and all that, where he encounters this hobo who gives him this existential discussion, none of it actually matters. None of the flash, none of these heavy percussion sequences, because the soundtrack is blasting the whole time. Like, it is doing third act intense final mission stuff, like, the whole way through. And you are feeling, oh, we are on edge, this is serious business, something big's gonna happen. And it piddles out to nothing before transitioning into a sequence of roller coaster ride scenes, essentially, where the Polar Express apparently is built on, like, King Ka, I guess, where it's going up and down and across a lake. Who builds a railroad on a lake, by the way? I know it's a magical railroad and you're not supposed to take it too seriously, but why would you put the railroad tracks under the ice on a lake? I know the lake froze over or whatever, but it's so ridiculous. And, like, you built the massive roller coaster ride tracks over what? Nothing? But you couldn't do it over the lake? It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I know it's magical, but it's so unnecessary because it creates a sequence that takes place when we should be talking about the characters. These sequences fill up the entire first half of the movie. And after a certain point, you're like, okay, I don't know who these characters are. I don't care that they're in danger. I don't care what's happening. I just want to see these kids act like kids. And these kids are like climbing up on top of roofs. They're scaling the train. They're behind the wheel. And it's like, why? Why couldn't the kids just be talking amongst each other? Why couldn't the kids just be enjoying their hot chocolate, talking about Christmas, reminiscing on flashbacks to what happened before getting on the train? Why couldn't we have a human moment? Why couldn't we have people just exist? Why do we have to have kids pulling themselves onto slippery, dangerous train surfaces? And the fact that this kid doesn't slip and slide off the roof when he's on top of it, with all the snow piled on it, with all the momentum and wind gushing against them, it strains credibility. Everything strains so much credibility that you can only take so much, and you can only take it when you really are invested in the characters. And the film makes no attempt to invest you in the characters. Now, I know before I mentioned that the book doesn't follow that same structure. It just has the kids existing. Like, the kids they're there, they're on the train, they're going from point A to point B. They only have characters. You're meant to project onto them. That works for a short book. But when you take that book and fit it into the Save the Cat structure, into the hero's journey, we need someone to gravitate towards. We need personality. And if at every point in the movie there's an action sequence, that means there's no downtime with the characters. We can't just chill a little bit. It feels manufactured. I can see why Zemeckis wanted to put so much money into it when putting these sequences in, because it's flashy. It's like he wants to show off the capabilities of his animation process, as opposed to telling a compelling narrative. But okay, so we reached the midpoint of the film. Now, keep in mind, this is halfway through the film, and none of the characters have had a conversation of any meaningful value. But they have their first one at the midpoint, where the lonely kid, they reach the North Pole. They're all getting out. The conductor's going, okay, Santa's about to give the first gift of the season. Everyone line up. We're going to go to the North Pole. We're going to meet the elves and all that. Through the most empty, vacant-looking North Pole I've ever seen. It looks desolate at times. I know it's like, the elves are all going somewhere here, but even the elves, all they look like are like copy-pasted assets in like a video game, essentially. And the kids, the boy and the girl, go with the lonely kid who's still on the train. He hasn't left the train yet. And you're like, oh, hey, come on outside the train and join us, because we're about to go to the North Pole, we're going to see Santa, it's going to be great. And the kid's like, well, Christmas hasn't ever worked out for me. The lonely kid says that. And they're like, okay, don't worry about that. Christmas, Santa, let's go. And at this point, you're going, okay, well, why doesn't Christmas work out for you? Did your dog die on Christmas? Did your parents get a divorce? Did, Santa Claus eat the last cookie you wanted in your cookie tin and you're like upset about it still? We don't know. We never find out, because when the kids are getting on the cart to find the lonely kid and bring him out to see Santa, they step on like a lever and it disconnects their cart from the rest of the train, and they're going sliding down. This is where the bad guys close in. This is the darkest part of the movie. They are lost on a train that's going out of control. Exactly what's happened in every other conflict so far in this film. So even the dark part of the soul sequence, where that's the lowest point, it's no lower than any other sequence so far. Because they blew their load, so to speak, so early on with these elaborate sequences, the darkest part of the film doesn't feel distinct from what's happened previously. And so as a structure, we're going, okay, what does this have to do with anything? And by the way, at no point in this film does the theme of belief come up, except when the boy is talking to the hobo, so far. Now in Act 3, they try to weave it back in. The girl hears the sound of Santa's sleigh bells, and because she believes in Santa, she can lead the group out. Now, the main character, the boy, the protagonist, he's the only one who can't hear the bells. How he can't hear the bells after going to the North Pole, seeing all these elves, seeing this structure out there that defies the beliefs he previously had, is anybody's guess. They get out there, they get to the big pile of gifts. They're led by a bell. They take a few different roller coaster ride sequences to get there, and they end up in Santa's bag, along with the annoying kid who apparently followed them the entire time, and we just didn't see it until now, apparently. But sure, okay. Get to Santa, bells from the sleigh fall off, kid picks it up, rings in his ear, doesn't hear it at first, but then starts to hear it when he tells himself to believe, meets Santa. This sequence is kind of good. It's a great scene, honestly. There's a sense of, like I said before, the mystery of Christmas, the magic of Christmas, and there is some beautiful music that plays alongside it, and Tom Hanks as Santa is really good. But the problem is, Unlike the opening scene, which had no context to it, it was just a scene in isolation, we have spent 50 minutes on roller coasters, on these thrilling quote-unquote sequences with no passion behind them, to realize we know nothing about these characters. Now in the book, this scene works because it's just a scene in isolation. But this, we were spent with so many loud sequences that we're exhausted, we're worn out. And we're worn out because we don't know who these characters are. We felt nothing for them. So this sequence doesn't matter. The theme of belief was not properly woven into Act 2 all that much. And so, the idea of belief in Act 3, which is central to the book, because it's a through line throughout everything, isn't properly anchored to anything. It just is brought up, and it doesn't resonate with us, the audience, because what are we supposed to take from the rest of the film? That don't build your train on a roller coaster track, you know? Don't jump to conclusions. Don't help people by trying to get them the ticket and then lose it for them. Don't be sloppy. Don't rip a hole in your pocket where you're going to drop that bell you get out of. You know, it's like one of those things where it's like, this doesn't really mean anything to us. And to make matters worse, the kids don't really go on arcs. The boy, the protagonist, kind of goes on an arc. He doesn't believe, then he believes. Okay, that's his arc. Leader girl, what does she do? She's the same character when she enters the film than when she ends the film. The lonely kid. He's lonely at the start and he's less lonely at the end, but not really, nothing in the plot seems to indicate why he's changed. It just is he's less lonely. Then there's the know-it-all kid, who actually has the best arc of all. He's irritating, and then Santa publicly humiliates him and he tries to be better. Now, in my opinion, public humiliation being a positive motivator for change, that's the most unrealistic part of this movie, personally. But I digress. Maybe it's a little optimism, a little Christmas magic going in there. But again, the problem is, you don't feel like we've gone on a real journey. We feel like we've gone on a roller coaster. And what sucks is that there's a lot of visual world building here. A lot of the sets indicate and imply a lot, but we're not really given reason to have them resonate with us. There's a great scene on the train where they're traveling back from another roller coaster scene. They travel into a cart filled with recycled toys from Christmases past. They rejected toys from kids. And there's a sense of eeriness to this, all these toys being set up. Now, one thing they could have done that would have been interesting is have maybe the boy see a toy he rejected from a previous Christmas. Maybe he sees the memories of kids who stopped believing as well, and that kind of haunts him. That kind of shows him the impact of non-belief on other people. Maybe parents who give their kid a gift hoping that the kid will like it, only for that kid to reject it. And you see the disappointment in the parents. You see maybe the deadening of the soul of the kid. Something interesting like that could have been done. Instead, Zemeckis has the hobo present a Scrooge doll, like a puppet, to scare the kid and tell him that he's like a Scrooge, which makes no sense because all we've seen so far is this kid be generous with others. It's like, what is this scene? And then you find out later, Zemeckis included it in this whole scene in the movie, not because of some theme or idea, but because he really wanted a scene involving puppets. Yeah, that's why it's in the movie. Zemeckis wanted puppets in there somewhere, and he put them in. Why is this roller coaster scene in there? Well, Zemeckis wanted it there. Why is this big, elaborate moment here? Well, Zemeckis constructed the set to lead us to this one sequence. Everything is a set piece first and an idea second. So, what about that hobo character? Why did Zemeckis add this character? He does nothing. He's given a lot of build-up. He's given a lot of scenes where he talks to the protagonist. But none of the dialogue scenes he has with this kid actually feeds into how the boy resolves his conflict. Because he resolves his conflict of belief by seeing Santa and hearing the bell not ring. Nothing that the ghost says. I know he says the whole seeing is believing and all that. But like, it didn't really help with anything. He just restated like his own internal doubts, which were already shown to us by the opening sequence. And it could have better been communicated to us if any of the children had a real conversation with each other. And then there's the musical angle. I forgot to mention, this is a musical, and all the songs suck, except for the end song, which is on the radio every single day in Christmas. If you want to hear that song, just flip on the radio. You'll probably hear it eventually. Let's take a look at the Hot Chocolate song. It's insipid. Why would you have this scene in here? It's all these floaty, stiff marionettes of CG bouncing around the room, tossing chocolate around in a song that's not even that good. It's not a good song at all. A good song in a musical usually furthers the ideas or themes of the narrative. This is clearly trying to be the Be Our Guest scene for Polar Express, except A, the song's not that good, B, B, our guest has actual themes resonant in the song, and C, it actually makes you uncomfortable more than comforting. This hot chocolate scene in the book is meant to reflect the Polar Express taking care of the kids, showing that they're protected, that they're loved. What does this dancing sequence of chocolate flying through the air actually communicate? Why couldn't the people just be normal? Just walk out with a trolley, pour them some hot chocolate, then leave. This could be a great scene where the kids bond, and I don't want to give this series compliments. Harry Potter on the Hogwarts Express has a scene in every book where the trolley lady comes around with gummies and sweets and all sorts of things, and the kids immediately feel happy and at home.
Anything off the trolley, dears?
It's a comforting scene meant to comfort the audience and the characters. This scene should have been more like Harry Potter, and the fact I'm saying that actually hurts me to say slightly. And then there's the dumb song that the lonely kid and the girl sing about Christmas. Now this could have been a great scene for a song where maybe the lonely kid communicates why he hates Christmas. Again, much like the scene in Toy Story 2 where Jessie sings about her old owner, her kid. That could have been a really good sequence if maybe this song was used to communicate ideas and communicate character points. But instead, it's just sort of there, and it's just sort of hollow. And it doesn't accomplish anything other than having the kids sing about Christmas, which is, we know about Christmas. The whole movie's about Christmas. What does this actually serve that's distinct from the rest of the film? And it's all these insipid kids singing the Polar Express song or whatever, and it's just boring and useless, and I hate it, and it annoys me, and it just pisses me off when I'm watching this film. Now look, what it all comes down to is this. The film lacks character arcs. At no point in this story do the characters behave or act like people. They don't have stories or points where they change. For roughly 90% of the runtime, no, maybe 80%, you're shown just roller coaster scenes. And the last 20%, it's from the book. It's all filler between great scenes from the book, and unfortunately, because of all this filler of noise and visual chaos, you're left actually too tired to care about those scenes. Because it's adrenaline after adrenaline after adrenaline. You never get given a chance to sit down with the characters and stop. It's just noise. It's just so loud and relentless and dumb, and it doesn't add anything to anything. You're just watching stuff that doesn't actually mean a single thing to you, the audience. And I cannot stand it, because it indicates that Zemeckis thought that all he had to do was jingle keys in front of kids' faces for 90 minutes to tell a compelling story, when the Polar Express as a narrative is a soft, gentle narrative that reflects on kids' humanity and belief more than anything else. So let me ask you this. What do I think the Polar Express as a film should have been? Well, first off, I don't think it should have been a film. Make it a 30-minute special for Christmas time. That used to be the trend, There used to be holiday specials we used to make back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, even 2000s. The Rankin Bass ones are the most popular. Films that were very short, very direct, little animated pieces that told a story and then ended. Didn't have a whole lot of narrative to tell, but they told the narrative without wasting any of the audience's time. And while they were song sequences, they furthered the narrative or created a sense of wonder. There's one in particular that stands out.
The whole world seemed to be held in a dreamlike stillness. It was a magical day, and it was on that day I made the snowman.
Based on Raymond Briggs's beautiful storybook for kids, The Snowman tells the story of a kid who one winter day builds a snowman, who that night comes to life. And the two walk around the house, they experience some fun hijinks, with hints of the snowman's fragile nature when confronted with fire or given a freezer he can chill out like it's a hot box in. Before long, they go, walking in the air, over to a snowman roundhouse party, hosted by Santa Claus himself, and the boy returns home in the morning, filled with joy, wakes up early to see and have another day of adventure with his snowman, only to come out to find the snowman has melted, leaving the boy a single souvenir, a scarf given to him by Santa, as proof it wasn't all just a dream, a sign to believe in something magical. What is amazing about the snowman is that the animated short retains the book's visual aesthetic, the sketchy looking artwork, the scrabbled in colors. It all maintains that, maintaining a storybook visual style that communicates to the audience the sense of comfort, a sense of warmth. And while there's not a lot going on, the characters don't really undergo arcs, for example. There's magic in the world. They see it at the start. It's there at the end. And there's no dialogue in this film, unless you count the opening sequence, which may or may not have either Raymond Briggs or David Bowie or Santa Claus, apparently, communicate the ideas of the snowman.
One winter I made a really big snowman. You got this scarf for me.
Polar Express should have been defined more by tone, not by plot, much like how the snowman is defined by tone, not by plot. It makes you feel something like an art piece, rather than guide you along roller coasters. There is stillness, there is humanity, and without using a single line of dialogue, the snowman better develops the snowman and the boy than the Polar Express did with 90 minutes and all of its high-budgeted nonsense. Okay, but again, logically, there's more money to be made in a full-length feature film. But at this point in time, the holiday special was kind of fading in popularity, and we weren't making a lot of new ones. We were mainly replaying the old classics everyone had seen. So I get that. Studios don't want to make that. All right, what do? You make a full-length film. Well, how do you make it fit the 3-act structure without having all these elaborate sequences? Well, it just so happens that there was an animated film that came out in 2001 that could have been a perfect blueprint for what to do. A film where a character goes on another journey. They are divided from the real and the unreal. Same act structure, same point in the script. And from that point, embark on a journey that forces them to confront characters, help others heal their pain, and experience visuals that we have never seen before or since captured. And that movie is Spirited Away. Yes, I know saying that the Polar Express should have been more like Spirited Away is a bit of a far-reaching statement. Of course, every film can be more like a Miyazaki film. But what Spirited Away does so well is it captures the sense of stillness, of comfort, but also of fear. If Zemeckis wanted to capture this thrilling sense of the wonder, maybe using fear in certain sequences or thrills, he could have done something more like Spirited Away did, where the thrills are character-centric, where each threat the characters encounter, again, episodic along the way, it's not like it's one continual through line, each episodic threat communicates a central theme of the film. It is centered around an idea rather than visuals. And while the visuals are incredible, it's not really about the visuals. It's about what the scene represents to the character Chihiro and her journey through the narrative. We see her go from this kind of bratty little, like a girl, like a kid, to being someone who has to deal with the maturity of helping others, of being empathetic and understanding her relationship both with her family, but also with the natural and supernatural world. It's beautiful. There's a scene in Spirited Away 2 where they go on a train, and it's one of the most beautiful, haunting scenes I've ever seen in animation. It's still when it needs to be, and takes its time without showing anything happening. Why did the train have to be so noisy in the Polar Express? Why did Zemeckis choose to incorporate such volume throughout the narrative? Well, I don't know. Maybe he likes jingling keys in front of the kids, I don't know. But Miyazaki understood that you don't need thrills. What you need is humanity. And when thrills do come in, make them thrilling, make them spectacular, make them unique. But remember to not forget that the calmness helps bring into contrast the thrilling moments. Polar Express is all roller coaster, but without any humanity to ground it, it becomes untenable. Another great example, My Neighbor Totoro. Another film where these kids go to a place, encounter something magical, and that magic is enchanting. And the film communicates this really well with these two girls. They never directly talk about what bothers them. They're more interacting with nature. But through their conversations, you do get to understand the divide between the kids. How the older sister is worried about their mother who's in the hospital. And that fear makes her act sometimes a little irrationally or maybe a little harshly to her younger sister, who's just too young to understand what's going on. And that humanity, that thread is really heartfelt. It's one of the reasons why My Neighbor Totoro, I think, is underrated in some circles. It doesn't have a bunch of thrilling sequences. It's very beautiful and silent and silly and still, but there's a lot of human emotion on the undercurrent of that narrative that I think really works. The big problem is ultimately that Zemeckis had to make a studio film, and Miyazaki doesn't care what his audiences think. He just puts whatever he wants on screen, and it happens to be incredible. But he doesn't have he doesn't really think of his audience's needs. He thinks of the art first. Zemeckis and the studio system clearly don't do that. The film had to be structured around a certain cinematic style that is popular. But he just went about this in a way that just felt sloppy. Why not make the characters characters? Was he afraid the kids would get bored? I don't know. But the adherence to this structure, following suit with things that worked previously, it's only hurt films. By adhering that you must follow a certain film structure, yes, you will market to a wider audience, but not all stories fit in this formula. Sometimes they work better without it. And sometimes, especially films driven by tone rather than characters or plot, the structure actually impedes what you can do. The problem with Hollywood is that they take stories and have to tell them in a certain structure for the general audiences. Take, for example, Netflix's upcoming adaptation of The Electric State. The Russo brothers are adapting this 2018 graphic novel of the same name by Simon Stalenhag. The work is this haunting, beautiful look at a world that's been utterly devastated by robotics. The horizon is littered with these hulking behemoths of capitalism, and it's hard not to see this and think of the poem Ozymandias. Look upon these works and despair. All is in ruin, but there's a human journey throughout. That human narrative, though, is secondary to the environment, to the naturalistic storytelling of the surroundings. And it creates this tone of melancholy and irony. We are devastated ultimately by commercialism, automation. But the film adaptation, which again has not come out yet as of this recording, just commercials and trailers and all that and posters, it feels like a sci-fi action film. The original graphic novel was one thing and this is another. It's like the iRobot situation all over again. Again, iRobot came out around the same time as the Polar Express. You take the name, you take the likeness of the original work, and you apply it to your action formula. This reflects a change in our modern cinema landscape, where every film has to fit into the Save the Cat structure, sometimes right down to the exact page marker that the book indicates. Hollywood saw a structure that worked, and rather than know it's a set of guidelines and actual rules, said, no, we must adhere to this constantly. And they echo. Everything echoes each other. When people talk about, like, say, MCU humor, they're not really complaining about the MCU. They're complaining about the echoes of the MCU. That Hollywood saw a few jokes worked, and now every film has to have the same jokey joke style. Sometimes, even Marvel chases its own tail. But what ends up happening is you get a bunch of films that are derivative of one another, that are following a formula rather than getting a good script, a good story, and a compelling narrative through. And usually, it's to adapt some property that is seen as beloved. And as long as you include a few key bits of fan service along the way, you can do whatever you want in the middle there. This is why the Polar Express disappoints me so much. What Zemeckis did was he took a few key plot points from a book that was beloved, that Tom Hanks loved too, and did his own thing with it to sell a product. And he did it by experimenting with new technology in a way that just what we weren't ready for yet. And in the process, rather than create something that adds meaningful visuals or concepts to the audience, all it does is ultimately bombard us with visuals that mean nothing to us. And it really sucks. It really sucks. I think more than anything, what I don't like about the Polar Express is less that it's a cynical little film, but more that it could have been really good. It could have been something really special. And the disappointment of what it was versus what it is, it just bums me out. It's the 20th anniversary of the film. I recommend watching it for yourself again to see if you think it has held up. If you have positive memories of it as a kid, I don't want to tell you to watch it again because you'll be disappointed, I think. But maybe that's just what growing up is. Maybe sometimes you ring that bell in your ear and you realize it wasn't that nice sounding to begin with. That it was always a hollow, empty silence.